3 years ago, I walked into the gleaming headquarters of Meridian Digital Solutions with stars in my eyes and a signed contract in my briefcase. At 26, I had somehow landed a position as senior marketing strategist under Victoria Chen, a woman whose reputation in the tech industry was legendary. She'd built 3 successful companies, been featured on Forbes' 40 Under 40 list twice, and had a waiting list of candidates desperate to work under her mentorship. The interview process had been brutal 5 rounds, including a presentation to the entire executive team. When Victoria herself called to offer me the position, I literally jumped up from my desk chair in my cramped studio apartment. The salary was double what I'd been making at my previous job, and the prestige of working for Victoria Chen felt like a golden ticket to the career I'd always dreamed of. My first day was intoxicating. The office was everything I'd imagined: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that probably cost more than my car, and a team of brilliant minds all working toward the same goal. Victoria introduced me to the team with what seemed like genuine pride, calling me exactly the kind of fresh thinking we need around here. For the first month, I was living the dream. I threw myself into every project with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I stayed late, came in early, and absorbed every piece of feedback like a sponge. Victoria seemed impressed with my work ethic, often stopping by my desk to discuss strategy or bounce ideas off me. But looking back now, I realize those early conversations were less about collaboration and more about extraction. Victoria had a way of asking questions that seemed mentoring but were actually mining digging for the nuggets of creativity that would later become her own. Brilliant insights. The toxic culture reveals itself. The first crack in my rose-colored proc glasses came during a client presentation in month 2. I'd spent weeks developing a comprehensive social media strategy for a major retail client, complete with innovative campaign concepts and detailed analytics projections. Victoria had reviewed my work, offered some suggestions, and praised my outside-the-box thinking. When presentation day arrived, I sat in the conference room with my laptop ready, expecting Victoria to introduce me and let me walk through my strategy. Instead, she stood up and began presenting my ideas as if they were her own. Every creative concept, every data point, every innovative twist, she delivered it all with the confidence of someone who'd conceived it herself. I sat there stunned, watching my boss take credit for weeks of my work while I became invisible in my own presentation. The client was impressed, asking detailed questions about the strategy. Victoria fielded them all expertly, having absorbed every detail of my research. When they asked about implementation, she finally gestured to me, saying, "Sarah will be handling the execution, of course." After the meeting, I approached Victoria privately. "I was hoping to present some of that work myself," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Spent a lot of time on those concepts." Victoria's smile was patronizing. "Sarah, you're still learning how to communicate with C-level executives. I was protecting you from being put on the spot before you're ready. This is how mentorship works. You'll get your chance when you've developed the necessary presence." Wanted to argue, to point out that I'd been presenting to executives at my previous job for 2 years. But Victoria had already moved on to her next meeting, leaving me standing in the hallway with my confidence shaken and my instincts screaming that something was very wrong. The pattern became clear over the following weeks. Victoria would request detailed reports on my projects, offer minimal feedback, and then present my work as collaborative efforts where she guided my thinking. In team meetings, she had a way of restating my ideas in slightly different words, making it seem like she was building on my thoughts when she was actually claiming ownership of them. The toxic culture extended beyond just my relationship with Victoria. The office was filled with unspoken hierarchies and subtle intimidation tactics. Victoria had an inner circle of employees who'd been there for years, and they seemed to take pleasure in making newer team members feel like outsiders. They'd have lunch conversations that would stop when you approached, schedule meetings without including you, and generally create an atmosphere where you constantly felt like you were failing some invisible test. Victoria's treatment of me became increasingly condescending. She'd make comments about my youthful enthusiasm in front of clients, suggesting that my ideas, while creative, needed her seasoned perspective to be viable. She'd interrupt me in meetings, finish my sentences, and generally position herself as the adult in the room, while I was treated like an eager intern. The fatal fallout, the breaking point, came during our biggest client pitch of the year, a Technova. A rapidly growing startup was looking for a marketing partner to help them scale their user acquisition. It was exactly the kind of innovative, high-growth client that everyone in our industry wanted to work with. I'd been developing the pitch strategy for 2 months, creating a comprehensive approach that combined traditional marketing with cutting-edge growth hacking techniques. The presentation was scheduled for a Friday morning, and I'd spent the previous weekend perfecting every slide, every data point, every creative concept. Thursday afternoon, Victoria called me into her office. "Been reviewing your Technova presentation," she said, not looking up from her computer. "I'm going to need you to make some adjustments." She handed me a marked-up copy of my presentation. As I flipped through the pages, my heart sank. Victoria had systematically removed my name from every slide, credited herself as the primary strategist, and relegated me to a small acknowledgement in the appendix. But what was worse was the content changes. She'd watered down my most innovative concepts, replacing them with generic strategies that any marketing firm could have proposed. "Victoria, these changes fundamentally alter the strategy," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "The client specifically asked for innovative approaches to user acquisition. These revisions make us look like every other agency." Victoria finally looked up from her screen. "Sarah, you're overthinking this. I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know what clients actually want versus what they say they want. Trust me on this." But the data supports the original approach. I persisted. The case studies show what you want them to show." Victoria interrupted. "You're still learning how to interpret data in a business context. This is why you need supervision." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the months of watching my work get appropriated, or the constant undermining of my competence, or just the realization that I was going to have to sit through another presentation where my ideas were presented as someone else's insights. Whatever it was, I found myself saying words I'd been holding back for months. "I won't present this watered-down version," I said. "The client deserves the strategy they asked for, not some generic approach that protects your ego." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's expression shifted from patronizing to cold fury. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "I said I won't present a strategy that I don't believe in," I repeated, my voice steadier now. "And I won't sit quietly while you take credit for my work anymore." Victoria stood up slowly, her face a mask of controlled rage. "I think you're forgetting who you work for, Sarah, and more importantly, who you are in this industry. You're a junior strategist with less than 3 years of experience. I'm Victoria Chen. I've built my reputation on delivering results, not on coddling entitled millennials who think they know better than their superiors." "This isn't about entitlement," I said. "This is about integrity." "Integrity," Victoria laughed. But there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about integrity? You've been in this industry for 5 minutes. You have no idea what integrity means in a business context. But you're about to learn." She moved around her desk, standing close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. "You have 2 choices, Sarah. You can present this strategy as I've revised it with appropriate credit allocation, and we can move forward professionally. Or you can continue this little tantrum and find out what happens to people who think they can challenge me." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing clearly. For the first time, the woman I'd been working for This wasn't a mentor or a leader. This was someone who had built her success on the backs of others and would destroy anyone who threatened to expose that truth. "Quit," I said quietly. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "No, Sarah, you're fired. And I'll be sure to explain to anyone who asks exactly why your employment here was terminated." The cold shoulder everywhere you turned walking out of Meridian Digital Solutions that Friday afternoon. I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief because I'd finally stood up for myself. Terror because I'd just blown up my career. In spectacular fashion. But I was 26, talented, and had a solid portfolio of work. How hard could it be to find another job? The answer, as it turned out, was devastatingly hard. My first indication that something was wrong came from the immediate silence. I'd sent my resume to 12 companies by Sunday evening, including some positions that seemed perfect for my skill. Normally, I'd expect to hear back from at least a few within a week. After 2 weeks of silence, I started following up. The responses, when they came at all, were polite but distant. Then I started getting interviews. The first few went well. Hiring managers seemed impressed with my portfolio and experience. But something strange kept happening. I'd have what felt like a successful conversation, be told they'd get back to me within a few days, and then nothing. Follow-up emails went unanswered. Phone calls weren't returned. After the fourth interview that ended in radio silence, I started to suspect what was happening. I reached out to Mark, a former colleague who'd left Meridian 6 months before me to join a competitor. We'd maintained a friendly relationship, and I thought he might have some insight into what was going wrong. "Can we meet for coffee?" I asked over text. I could use some advice about the job search. Mark's response came 3 hours later. "Hey, Sarah, I'm swamped with work right now. Maybe in a few weeks." That was the moment I knew for certain. Mark had always been eager to help people in his network, and his sudden unavailability wasn't a coincidence. Victoria had made good on her threat. I started doing research, reaching out to contacts in the industry to understand what was being said about me. The information came back in fragments, whispered conversations, and careful non-denials. The story Victoria was telling was devastatingly effective. I was difficult to work with, had unrealistic expectations about my role, and had been fired for insubordination and unprofessional behavior. But the real poison was more subtle. Victoria wasn't just bad-mouthing me, she was raising questions about my competence. She'd suggest that my portfolio work had been heavily supervised, that I'd struggled with basic strategic thinking, that I'd needed constant guidance to produce acceptable results. She was systematically dismantling my professional reputation with surgical precision. Bills pile up. Confidence shatters by month 3 of unemployment. My savings account was approaching zero. I'd been living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city, a luxury I'd justified with my Meridian salary. Now, with no income and no job prospects, I was staring at rent payments I couldn't afford, and a future that looked increasingly bleak. The psychological impact was almost worse than the financial stress. I'd built my entire identity around being good at my job, around being the kind of person who could land a position with Victoria Chen. Now I was spending my days refreshing job boards and my nights lying awake, wondering if Victoria had been right about me all along. I started taking freelance work wherever I could find it. A local restaurant needed help with their social media. A small nonprofit wanted someone to redesign their website. A friend of a friend had a startup that needed marketing copy. The work was sporadic, poorly paid, and far below my skill level. But it was enough to keep me afloat. The hardest part was the isolation. My former colleagues had all distanced themselves, either because they'd heard Victoria's version of events, or because they didn't want to risk being associated with someone who'd been blackballed. I spent most of my time alone in my apartment, working on projects that felt meaningless and wondering if I'd ever get my career back on track. There were nights when I'd sit on my couch, scrolling through LinkedIn and seeing my former colleagues posting about their successes, their promotions, their exciting new projects. Victoria herself was particularly active, sharing insights about leadership and mentorship that made me want to throw my laptop across the room. She'd post about the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people and how toxic attitudes could poison a team's culture. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m., replaying every interaction I'd had with Victoria, wondering if I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe I had been difficult to work with. Maybe my ideas hadn't been as good as I'd thought. Oh, maybe I really was just an entitled millennial who'd gotten too big for her britches. The doubt was eating me alive, but somewhere deep down, a small flame of anger kept burning. I knew the quality of my work. I knew the value of my ideas. And I knew that Victoria Chen had built her reputation on the backs of people like me, finding small allies for months into my exile. I got an unexpected lifeline. Jenny Martinez, a former Meridian employee who'd left the company about a year before me, reached out through a mutual connection. She'd heard about my situation and wanted to meet for coffee. "I heard what happened," Jenny said, stirring her latte nervously. "I want you to know that not everyone believes Victoria's version of events." Jenny had worked under Victoria for 2 years before transferring to a different department. She'd experienced the same credit theft, the same undermining, the same toxic dynamics that had eventually driven her to leave the company entirely. "Victoria has a pattern," Jenny explained. "She hires talented people, extracts their best ideas, takes credit for their work, and then finds ways to push them out before they can build enough credibility to challenge her. You're not the first person she's done this to," Jenny introduced me to a small network of Victoria's former employees, people who'd either been pushed out or had left on their own once they'd recognized the pattern. There were 6 of us in total, all talented professionals who'd been chewed up and spit out by Victoria's machine. They became my lifeline, not just professionally, but emotionally. For the first time in months, I was around people who understood what I'd been through, who could validate my experiences and remind me that I wasn't crazy. More importantly, they started throwing me work. Small projects at first, a strategy consultation here, a campaign development there. Nothing that would trigger Victoria's attention, but enough to slowly rebuild my confidence and my portfolio. Tom, a former creative director who'd left Meridian 3 years earlier, gave me my first real opportunity. His new company was working with a mid-sized tech firm that needed help with their content strategy. It was a 3-month project, well paid, and exactly the kind of work that would help me get back on my feet. "I can't offer you full-time employment," Tom said, "but I can give you a chance to prove yourself again. I can promise you that. Your work will be credited properly." Working with Tom's team reminded me why I'd fallen in love with marketing in the first place. We were solving real problems for real clients, and everyone's contributions were valued and acknowledged. I found myself working with an energy and creativity that I'd forgotten I possessed. The project was a success. The client was thrilled with the results, and Tom made sure my role was prominently featured in the case study. It was the first time in months that I felt like a professional again. Turning scraps into stepping stones, the success of Tom's project gave me something I'd been missing for months: momentum. Word started getting around the small network of Victoria's former employees that I was doing good work, and suddenly I had more freelance opportunities than I could handle. I started being strategic about the projects I took on. Instead of just grabbing whatever paid work was available, I focused on clients and projects that would build my reputation and expand my network. I took on a content strategy project for a growing e-commerce company, helped a nonprofit rebrand their digital presence, developed a comprehensive social media strategy for a local tech startup. Each project was a building block, not just financially, but professionally. I was working with clients who valued my input, who implemented my strategies, and who saw real results from my work. Slowly, I started remembering who I was as a professional, but more importantly, I started seeing patterns in the work I was doing. Most of my clients were smaller companies who couldn't afford the big marketing agencies. but they needed the same level of strategic thinking and creative execution. They were getting by with generic solutions or trying to handle marketing in-house. But they were missing the kind of integrated approach that could really scale their growth. I started thinking about what it would look like to build a company specifically designed to serve these mid-market clients, not trying to compete with the big agencies on their terms, but creating something entirely different, more nimble, or collaborative, more focused on actual results than on impressing clients with expensive presentations. The idea started as a daydream, but it gradually became a plan. I began reaching out to other talented freelancers, people who were skilled but undervalued by the traditional agency model. I started building a network of specialists who could work together on projects, sharing resources and expertise in ways that would benefit everyone. First wins, tiny contracts. Local clients. My first real client as an independent consultant was a family-owned restaurant chain with 5 locations across the city. They'd been struggling with their digital marketing, running Facebook ads that weren't converting and spending money on SEO services that weren't delivering results. The owner, Maria Santos, was frustrated and skeptical about hiring another marketing consultant. She'd been burned by a previous agency that had promised the world and delivered nothing but a hefty bill. "I can't afford to waste any more money," she told me during our first meeting. "I need someone who can actually help me grow my business, not just talk about it." I spent the first week doing deep research into their customers, their competition, and their current marketing efforts, instead of proposing a massive overhaul. I've focused on 3 specific areas where I could deliver immediate, measurable results. First, I redesigned their social media strategy to focus on local engagement and community building. Instead of generic food photos, we started showcasing the family behind the business, highlighting their community involvement, and creating content that made customers feel connected to the brand. Second, I restructured their paid advertising to target specific customer segments with personalized messaging. Instead of one generic ad for great Mexican food, we created targeted campaigns for lunch customers, families looking for dinner options, and people searching for catering services. Third, I implemented a simple but effective email marketing system that kept customers engaged between visits and encouraged repeat business. The results were immediate and measurable. Within 6 weeks, their social media engagement had tripled. Their ad conversion rates had improved by 40%, and their email campaigns were generating a 25% increase in repeat customers. Maria was thrilled. More importantly, she started referring me to other local business owners. Word spread that there was a marketing consultant who actually delivered results, who understood small businesses, and who didn't talk down to clients or promise unrealistic outcomes. Hustle pays off. Landing a breakthrough deal, the referral that changed everything, came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Leo, a local pediatrician whose practice I'd helped with their digital marketing, was friends with the CEO of a growing health tech startup called WellnessTrack. WellnessTrack had developed a mobile app that helped people track their health metrics and connect with healthcare providers. They'd secured their Series A funding, but were struggling to acquire users at a sustainable cost. They'd worked with 2 different marketing agencies, spending 6 figures on campaigns that had generated plenty of awareness, but very little actual user growth. "We need someone who understands our business model," said Alex Chen, WellnessTrack CEO, during our first meeting. "We're not looking for brand awareness campaigns or creative awards. We need users who will actually engage with our platform and become long-term customers." I spent 2 weeks studying their business model, their user data, and their previous marketing efforts. The agencies they'd worked with had treated them like a traditional consumer app, focusing on broad awareness, campaigns, and generic messaging. But WellnessTrack wasn't Instagram or TikTok. They were serving people with specific health concerns who needed to trust the platform with sensitive information. I proposed a completely different approach. Instead of trying to reach everyone, we'd focus on specific health communities and conditions. Instead of generic wellness messaging, we'd create content that addressed real health challenges and positioned Wellness Track as a trusted partner in people's health journeys. The strategy required a much more sophisticated understanding of healthcare marketing, including compliance with various regulations and sensitivity to people's privacy concerns. But I'd done my homework, and I was confident that this targeted approach would deliver better results than the previous broad-spectrum campaigns. Alex was impressed with the proposal, but he had one concern. Your work looks great, but you're essentially a one-person operation. We need someone who can scale this campaign and manage ongoing optimization. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to convince Alex that I could handle everything myself, I pitched him on something bigger. What if I could give you access to a team of specialists who could execute this strategy at the level you need, but with the accountability and personal attention you'd get from working with me directly? I proposed bringing together the network of freelancers. I've been building a content strategist, a paid advertising specialist, a conversion optimization expert, and a data analyst. Each person would be a specialist in their area, but I'd serve as the strategic lead and single point of contact. Alex was intrigued. So you're talking about building an agency? I'm talking about building something better than an agency, I said. A team that's specifically designed to deliver results for companies like yours. Scaling into a startup powerhouse, the Wellness Track campaign was a massive success. Within 3 months, we'd reduced their user acquisition cost by 60% while increasing user engagement by 150%. The targeted approach had resonated with their core audience, and we'd built a sustainable system for ongoing growth. But more importantly, the campaign had proven that my model worked. By bringing together a team of specialists and focusing on results rather than prestige, we delivered better outcomes than agencies with 10 times our resources. Alex became my biggest advocate, introducing me to other startup CEOs and singing the praises of our approach. Within 6 months, I had 5 clients, all paying substantial monthly retainers for ongoing marketing services. That's when I realized I wasn't just running a consulting practice anymore. I was building a company. I incorporated as digital growth. Partners hired my first full-time employee and signed a lease on a small office space. The growth was exponential. By the end of my first year, I had 12 employees and had to move to a larger office. By the end of year 2, we were a team of 5, working with clients across the country and generating over $3 million in annual revenue. The key to our success was the same principle that had gotten me started, focusing on results over everything else. While traditional agencies sold process and prestige, we sold performance. Our clients knew exactly what they were getting for their money, and we delivered measurable results that directly impacted their bottom line. We also maintained the collaborative, respectful culture that had been so absent from my experience at Meridian. Everyone's contributions were valued, credit was given where it was due, and we hired people based on their ability to deliver results, not their ability to play office politics. By year 3, Digital Growth Partners had become known as one of the most effective marketing agencies in the city. We'd been featured in industry publications, won several awards for our campaign results, and had a waiting list of clients who wanted to work with us. I'd built something I was genuinely proud of. It's a company that delivered real value to clients, while treating employees with respect and integrity. It was everything I'd wished Meridian could have been. Your old boss's company hits troubles. Cess has a way of making you forget your enemies, at least temporarily. I was so focused on building digital growth partners that I'd stopped paying attention to what was happening at Meridian Digital Solutions. Occasionally, I'd see Victoria's posts on LinkedIn or hear industry gossip. But mostly, I was too busy with my own company to spend much time thinking about the woman who'd tried to destroy my career. That changed when I got a call from Jenny Martinez, who'd maintained connections in the industry and had been keeping tabs on our former employer. "You need to hear this," Jenny said, barely able to contain her excitement. Meridian is in serious trouble. The story that emerged was almost too good to be true. Meridian had been coasting on their reputation for years, winning clients based on Victoria's personal brand rather than delivering innovative results. But the marketing landscape had been changing rapidly, and they'd failed to adapt, while agencies like mine were focused on data-driven performance marketing. Meridian was still selling traditional brand awareness campaigns that were becoming increasingly irrelevant. Their clients were demanding better ROI on their marketing spend, and Meridian couldn't deliver it. The tipping point had come when they'd lost 3 major clients in a single quarter. Each client had publicly criticized Meridian's outdated approach and lack of measurable results. Industry publications had started questioning whether Victoria Chen was still the marketing visionary she'd once been, or if she'd become too comfortable with past successes to innovate for the future. But the real crisis was financial. Meridian had been operating with high overhead and expensive office space, assuming that their premium pricing would always be sustainable. When clients started leaving, they'd had to lay off staff and cut expenses, which had only made their service quality worse. They're hemorrhaging money, Jenny explained. And Victoria is desperate to find a way to turn things around. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this news. Part of me was satisfied that Victoria was finally facing consequences for her toxic leadership style. But another part of me was focused on the business implications. If Meridian was struggling, that meant there might be opportunities for agencies like mine to pick up their displaced clients. A cold call you never expected 3 weeks after Jenny's call. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," Lisa said, looking puzzled. She says she's from Meridian Digital Solutions and that it's about a potential partnership opportunity. I looked up from my laptop, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Did you say Meridian Digital Solutions?" "Yes, a woman named Rebecca. She says she's Victoria Chen's assistant and that Victoria would like to schedule a meeting with you." My first instinct was to refuse. I had no interest in any kind of business relationship with Victoria Chen, but curiosity got the better of me. Could she possibly want with me? "Send her in," I said. Rebecca was a young woman, probably not much older than I'd been when I'd first started at Meridian. She was nervous, clearly uncomfortable with whatever message she'd been sent to deliver. "Ms. Thompson," she began. "Ms. Chen would like to explore potential opportunities for collaboration between our companies. She's wondered if you might be available for a meeting later this week." I studied Rebecca's face, trying to read what wasn't being said. Victoria Chen, the woman who'd tried to destroy my career, was now asking for a meeting. This wasn't a coincidence. "What kind of collaboration?" I asked. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Chen thinks there might be opportunities for strategic partnership, given your respective expertise in different areas of the market." I almost laughed. Victoria's expertise was apparently in driving away clients and failing to adapt to industry changes. But I was curious to see what desperation looked like on someone who'd once seemed so powerful. "Tell Ms. Chen I'm available Friday at 2 p.m., I said. "She can come here." Rebecca looked surprised. She was hoping you might be able to meet at the Meridian offices. "No," I said firmly. "She wants to meet. She can come here." Face to face, watching him squirm Friday afternoon, I was waiting in the conference room when Lisa escorted Victoria Chen into my office. It had been 3 years since I'd seen her, and the changes were subtle but unmistakable. She was still impeccably dressed, still projecting the kind of confidence that had once intimidated me. But there was something different about her energy. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand as if we were old friends. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." I shook her hand briefly and gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Victoria, what can I do for you?" She looked around my office, the modern furniture, the awards on the walls, the view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. I could see her taking it all in. probably comparing it to her own office and wondering how the junior strategist she'd fired had ended up here. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," she said. "What you've built here is quite remarkable. Been following Digital Growth Partners' success in the industry publications." "Thank you," I said, not offering any additional pleasantries. "But I assume you didn't come here to congratulate me?" Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "You're right. I'm here because I think there's an opportunity for our companies to work together." She launched into what was clearly a prepared pitch. Meridian's strengths in brand strategy and high-level client relationships could complement Digital Growth Partners' expertise in performance marketing and data analytics. By combining our capabilities, we could offer clients a more comprehensive solution than either company could provide alone. As she talked, I watched her carefully. This was the same woman who'd once told me I was too junior to present to executives, who'd stolen my ideas and taken credit for my work, who'd tried to destroy my reputation when I dared to challenge her. Now she was sitting in my office, trying to convince me that we should be partners. "What specific arrangement are you proposing?" I asked when she finished her pitch. "Well, we could structure it several ways," Victoria said, her confidence returning as she moved into familiar territory. "We could do joint pitches for larger clients, or perhaps a revenue-sharing arrangement for referred business. I'm open to different models." I leaned back in my chair. "Okay, and why would I want to do that?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Because it would benefit both companies. You'd get access to enterprise-level clients, and we'd get access to your performance marketing capabilities." "Victoria," I said quietly, "let me ask you something. You remember our last conversation?" Her composure wavered for just a moment. "Sarah, I hope we can focus on the future rather than the past. We're both professionals, and do you remember what you said to me?" I interrupted. The silence stretched between us. Victoria's facade of friendly professionalism was cracking, revealing something harder and more desperate underneath. "I remember that we had a disagreement about professional boundaries," she said finally. "But that was 3 years ago. We've both grown since then. You told me that I was about to learn what happens to people who think they can challenge you," I said. "You blackballed me from the industry. You told everyone who would listen that I was incompetent and difficult to work with." Victoria's face had gone pale. I think you're misremembering." "I'm not misremembering anything," I said. "You tried to destroy my career because I had the audacity to stand up to you. And now you're sitting in my office asking me to partner with you. Negotiating on your terms." Victoria sat in silence for a long moment, her carefully constructed pitch crumbling around her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "Sarah, I admit that our working relationship didn't end well. But surely you can see that this partnership could benefit both of us. We're both successful professionals." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You're not successful. You're desperate. Your company is hemorrhaging clients. Your reputation is in tatters. And you're here because you need something from me." Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? You've lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months. Your revenue is down 40% from last year. You've had to lay off half your staff. Industry publications are questioning whether you're still relevant." I watched the color drain from her face as I recited the facts Jenny had shared with me. "The only reason you're here is because you're hoping that associating with my company will somehow restore your credibility." "That's not," Victoria started, then stopped. She seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders sagging as the fight went out of her. "Here's what I'll do," I said, leaning forward. "I'll consider a partnership, but it's going to be on my terms." I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd prepared after Rebecca's visit. I'd known this wasn't a meeting between equals, and I'd wanted to be ready. "Digital Growth Partners will acquire Meridian's client contracts and intellectual property," Kai said, turning the screen so she could see. "Your employees will be offered positions with my company, subject to our standard hiring process. You'll personally sign a 5-year non-compete agreement." Victoria stared at the screen, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something. That might have been panic. You're talking about acquisition, not partnership. I'm talking about salvaging what's left of your company, I said. Your choice is to accept this offer or watch Meridian Digital Solutions collapse completely. This is ridiculous, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. I built that company. I won't just hand it over to someone who. What? I asked. Someone who you fired? Someone whose career you tried to destroy. Someone who built a more successful company than yours. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. What about my role? What about my position in the new company? I'd been expecting this question. You'll have a consulting role for the first year, helping with the transition. After that, you'll be free to pursue other opportunities. A consulting role. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. I'm Victoria Chen. I don't work for other people. You work for me now, I said simply. Or you don't work at all. Closure more satisfying than revenge 2 weeks later? Victoria Chen sat in my conference room with her lawyer, a stack of contracts spread across the mahogany table. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the pen. And I couldn't help but remember the last time I'd seen her this close 3 years ago. When she'd stood over my desk and threatened to destroy my career, the acquisition terms were generous, enough to allow Victoria to save face publicly. But the reality was clear to both of us. Meridian Digital Solutions would cease to exist as an independent company. Its assets, contracts, and remaining staff would be absorbed into Digital Growth Partners. Victoria would receive a consulting fee for the first year, helping to transition her former clients, and then she'd be free to start over somewhere else. The non-compete clause extends to all digital marketing services. My lawyer explained as Victoria reviewed the final documents. Ms. Chen will not be able to work for any competing agency or start her own firm for 5 years. Victoria looked up at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of defeat and something that might have been respect. 5 years is a long time. The same amount of time you spent trying to keep me out of this industry, I said. Consider it a learning experience. She signed each document slowly, her lawyer witnessing every signature. When she reached the final page, she paused, pen hovering over the paper. I want you to know, she said quietly, that I didn't set out to hurt you. I was protecting my company, my reputation. You were protecting your ego, I interrupted. You couldn't stand the thought that someone you'd underestimated might actually be good at their job. Victoria signed the last document and set the pen down. What happens now? Now you help me transition your clients, I said. You introduce me to your contacts, you share your institutional knowledge, and you do everything you can to ensure that the companies you've been working with continue to receive excellent service. And then you figure out what comes next. Maybe you'll discover that there's life after Victoria Chen. The meeting ended with handshakes and polite pleasantries. But as Victoria gathered her things, she turned back to me one last time. For what it's worth, she said, you were right about the Technova strategy. The approach you originally proposed, I saw them implement something similar with another agency 6 months later. It worked. I nodded, unsurprised. I know. After Victoria left, I sat alone in the conference room looking out at the city skyline. 3 years ago, I'd been sitting in a cramped studio apartment, wondering if my career was over. Now I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, with the woman who'd tried to destroy me working as my consultant. But the satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge. It was about vindication. Every client we'd helped grow, every employee who'd found meaningful work at Digital Growth Partners, every innovative campaign we'd executed, it all proved that Victoria had been wrong about me. I wasn't the incompetent junior strategist she'd made me out to be. I was exactly who I'd always known I was. The acquisition of Meridian's assets allowed Digital Growth Partners to expand into new markets and serve larger clients. Victoria's Former employees were talented professionals who'd been held back by toxic leadership. And most of them thrived in our collaborative environment. Within 6 months, our combined revenue had increased by 60%, and we'd established ourselves as one of the premier marketing agencies in the region Victoria. Fulfilled her consulting obligations professionally, if not enthusiastically. She helped transition her former clients, shared her industry contacts, and provided the institutional knowledge necessary to integrate Meridian's operations into our own. True to her word, she worked diligently to ensure that the transition was smooth, and that clients continued to receive excellent service, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. This was a woman who'd built her identity around being the most important person in the room. And now she was essentially an employee in a company built by someone she'd once dismissed. She was professional, but I could see the resentment simmering. Beneath the surface, on her last day, Victoria stopped by my office to say goodbye. She'd accepted a position with a consulting firm in another city, far enough away that the non-compete wouldn't be an issue. "I suppose I should thank you," she said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. "The settlement was more generous than I deserved." "Was fair?" I said. "That's all I ever wanted from you, to be treated fairly." Victoria nodded, then surprised me by saying, "I hope you know that I did respect your work, even when I was taking credit for it. You were the most talented strategist I'd ever worked with. Then why did you try to destroy my career?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was threatened by you. Because I knew that if people saw what you were capable of, they'd start questioning what I was bringing to the table. It was easier to tear you down than to confront my own limitations." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from Victoria Chen. Surprisingly, it was enough. After she left, I walked through the offices of Digital Growth Partners, looking at the team we'd built. Jenny Martinez was now our head of client services, leading a team of account managers who actually cared about their clients' success. Tom, my former ally, had joined us as creative director, bringing his talent for innovative campaigns to our growing roster of clients. The former Meridian employees who joined us were flourishing in an environment where their contributions were valued and their ideas were heard. We'd created something that was the opposite of everything Meridian had been under Victoria's leadership. Instead of a toxic hierarchy built on fear and competition, we had a collaborative culture built on mutual respect and shared success. Instead of taking credit for others' work, we celebrated individual contributions and made sure everyone's achievements were recognized. The company continued to grow, expanded to new cities, hired more talented professionals, and took on increasingly complex clients. Industry publications featured our work. Business schools used our campaigns as case studies. And competitors tried to poach our employees with increasingly desperate offers. But the real measure of our success wasn't in the revenue, numbers, or the industry recognition. It was in the culture we'd created, the clients we'd helped grow, and the careers we'd helped build. We'd proven that you could run a successful business without destroying the people who worked for you. They called me petty for the way I'd handled Victoria's downfall. Maybe they were right. Maybe I could have been more magnanimous, more forgiving, more willing to let bygones be bygones. But I'd built this empire from the ashes she'd left me, in turning her betrayal into fuel for my own success, her toxicity into a blueprint for something better. And as I stood in my corner office, looking out at the city where I'd once been unemployed and blackballed, I realized I'd never apologize for making her live with that. Because the best revenge wasn't destroying Victoria Chen. It was building something so much better than what she'd created that her legacy would be overshadowed by the very person she'd tried to destroy. The empire I'd built would outlast her. Reputation outlast her company and outlast the toxic culture she'd represented. And every success we achieved, every client we helped, every employee who found meaningful work with us saw of it was proof that she'd been wrong about me from the very beginning. In the end, that was closure more satisfying than any revenge could have been.